I'm Evan Czaplicki. I am the creator of the Elm programming language. For the past few years, I've been working on a database language separately that's called Acadia. And so before we get into the main topic, I want to take a step back and just ask, how does adoption work? So we'll look at a technical perspective and an organizational perspective. In the technical perspective, we have authors of languages. They write code. That goes to developers. They write code. That goes to businesses. The businesses do great. And the authors write more code, the developers write more code, the businesses do better. We write better code, we write more code, we get more businesses. And that's the approach. So I would kind of associate with the Silicon Valley culture where we're primarily focused on the technical aspects, and any sort of like social analysis of how this is all going to work together isn't happening. And similarly, like influencer culture where it's like, are you posting? Like, are you relevant? Like, where are the new releases? Like, if it's not happening in social media, like, is it any good? And so, alternatively, there's this organizational perspective, which is that we have language authors. They produce features and learning resources for developers. The developers provide their labor to businesses, and then the businesses create a healthy work environment for the authors. And so under this understanding, the idea is that if the author does a good job, we have developers who are writing nice, good quality code. They're doing it in such a way that makes the business successful, and we all grow together and get stronger together. Now, obviously, with many languages that we care about, this link doesn't exist. So for the first 10 years I was working on Elm, I kind of, not because I have any great love for Silicon Valley culture, but I had this technical perspective. And then around 2020, I realized, I really need to take this organizational perspective seriously. And so I took a step back from producing features and learning resources until I could fix this broken link in the organizational structure. And so I gave this talk, The Economics of Programming Languages, kind of at the height of my frustration of trying to figure out how to solve this problem, and it ended sort of without a clear resolution. So for this talk today, Rethinking Our Adoption Strategy, I'm hoping to provide a better resolution to this issue. So instead of being all about code, we want to think about how to become stronger together through cooperation. So the three areas we'll look at is adoption, organization, and culture. Adoption and organization are kind of like areas where we have challenges, and the section on culture is kind of like how do we meet those challenges in a way that will work for programmers in a good way. So adoption. So usually when we think about adoption, we think about developers, but developers don't really decide what languages are used. So maybe we should think of the CTO, and I've been very lucky to have two CTOs who supported my work on Elm, and a bunch of CTOs out there who build their companies with it. But the CTO as well, they have to make their decisions along with their other executives. They change jobs. So ultimately, the final boss of adoption is the non-technical business person. This person is going to be there no matter who else happens. There's going to be someone looking in an Excel spreadsheet and crossing off the fundamental investments in their own business. So we know they have their charts, so we know they have their Patagonia vests and button-up shirts. But what's going on behind the vest? So I went and tried to find out in books what's going on in there. So this book I don't particularly like, but it's a good way of learning how Silicon Valley people see themselves and other Silicon Valley people. So this book gives us a useful idea. They say if the goal of visionaries is to take a quantum leap forward, the goal of the pragmatist is to make a percentage improvement, incremental, measurable, predictable progress. If they're installing a new product, they want to know how other people have fared with it. The word risk is negative in their vocabulary. It does not connote opportunity or excitement, but rather the chance to waste money and time. They will undertake risks when required, but they will put in place safety nets and manage the risk very closely. So on first glance, this isn't exactly the list we want to see coming in with typed functional languages of what the priorities of this person are. But I think this is possible to overcome. Before we move into that, I want to dive into how does this non-technical business person think about programming languages? And how do they think about the business characteristics of these languages? So in terms of types of languages, I think it's useful to think of the two categories as platform languages and productivity languages. So in platform languages, you have your business, the non-technical business person, and they want to sell products and services to people. And they're going to do that through a web browser. But this isn't a web browser. We're looking at it from the business person's perspective. This is a digital marketplace. This is not, we're not surfing the web. We're connecting buyers and sellers. We're conducting transactions. And in the digital marketplace, it runs JavaScript. So other examples of this is if you want to be in the Apple App Store, it's going to run Objective-C and Swift. If you want to be on a traditional operating system and write a desktop application, you're running C. So essentially, the platform language is the language that's built into a specific digital marketplace. If you want to do business in that digital marketplace, the language is there. That's the language you use. So with productivity languages, we have the business. They want to sell to people. They're going through the digital marketplace. The digital marketplace runs JavaScript. But they're writing Elm. So in this case, rather than, or for one reason or another, they find it more productive, more efficient to deal with Elm, and that makes it easier for them to reach the people who will buy their products. So yeah, the rough definition is a language that makes development more efficient than using the underlying platform language directly. So, right, so with a platform language, it doesn't make sense to think of like the goals of the language itself because it is a part of this digital marketplace. The digital marketplace is what has goals. And so those goals are have the largest possible marketplace, accommodate all different kinds of businesses. Apple is running their app store, and whatever kind of app you have, whatever place you are, they want to take their 30% cut, their 30% commission. And so as a result of that, these platform languages have certain tendencies. I don't think there's any sort of top-down directions, but I think sort of structurally you sort of end up with patterns of design. So one is to add many features and have companies use their preferred subset. I think this is a generally good strategy for designing languages that you want a lot of people to use. And the important thing here is that it's better to have a complex language than to have a business switch to an alternative marketplace. So if you're operating a business in a place where the university teaches object-oriented programming, you want that to be in the language. If you're in an area where they teach functional programming, you want that to be in the language. And whatever people you have around you, you're able to run in that marketplace. With productivity languages, we're not so tied to like, do we care if the market is as big as possible? The goal is just make development more efficient. And so if for a certain type of business, we can make them 20% more effective, that's great. If it doesn't work at all for some large class of other businesses, that's not a problem for us. Like, that's not a design constraint that, on these languages. And in terms of communicating to a business person, like what's good about a productivity language, usually we're used to communicating with developers. And so we'll say, there's no runtime errors, but the business person doesn't really know what a runtime error is. They say, I don't care if there's 1,000,000 or 1,000 or 0. I care if it's released in Q2. And if it's released in Q3, that's bad. And if between me and the release, there's 1,000,000 runtime exceptions or 1,000,000,000 runtime, I don't know what that is. I want it in Q2. So the way we would want to communicate with these people is like, hey, we can deliver a feature 20% faster. We can spend 60% less time on tests and bug fixes. We can retain developers 15% longer. Now, obviously, this is extremely off-putting to developers, but the purpose here is to sort of define the challenges, right? So in terms of the business characteristics of these languages, when we think of a platform language, this business person has a budget, they have to put money towards these different departments, some revenues coming in. And so we can ask, where on the budget does a platform language appear? Does it appear in engineering or sales? So the trick is that it actually is taken out before the money even comes into the business through the App Store commission, right? So if you're running an iPhone app, Apple and Google, they'll take their commission, and in Apple, they'll put money towards Objective-C, Swift, LLVM, Clang. Google will put it towards the languages needed for Android. And also, when you put your marketing budget towards online advertising, that goes into Google, Facebook, et cetera, and funds JavaScript development. And, Apple will get some of that money through traffic acquisition costs. Mozilla gets money through traffic acquisition costs. So essentially, these languages are getting paid for without the business people even knowing that it's part of their budget. And the benefits of this approach is that the businesses pay for the development of the language. The cost of the language does not appear in the budget. Nobody's thinking about it in that so explicitly. And finally, business success is correlated with the success of the language. So what that means is if a business person says, okay, I'm doing $100,000 of revenue, in the case of if you're running in the App Store in the United States, 30,000 of that is a commission to Apple. And if you're doing $1 million, 300,000. If you're doing 10 million, $3 million. So as your business grows, Apple's ability to support the language and the ecosystem is also growing. There's no reality where you outgrow them. So they have this closed organizational loop that is important. So in the case of the productivity language, again, we have our budget, we have the revenue coming in, and there's two different strategies that have been used to produce languages here. So strategy one is to compete on price. We look at the benefits of the platform language from the business perspective, and we say, let's give up on this correlation and say the cost of the language doesn't appear on the budget. We'll find some other way to pay for it through universities, through companies that will do stuff in-house. And this, for the business person, raises a question of risk. Can it support our needs as we grow, right? So if we have, some number of developers distributed across universities and small companies, but I'm running this company and it goes 100,000 to $1 million to $10 million of revenue, and I realize, oh, we're getting these garbage collection pauses that we don't know how to deal with. It's like, are those 4 people going to be able to accommodate that? And second, who do I call if something goes wrong? It's like, do I even know those people? Do I know if they'd be accommodating? Even if I say, hey, I want to financially support work on this garbage collector, who do I go to talk about that? And finally, will I be able to get support in 10 years? I think this one is like sort of a weird one, but Adobe Flash did stop existing. It's like, it can happen. So strategy 2 is to say, hey, we're going to look at these benefits and just give up on not appearing on the budget. And this is possible because businesses will spend money on engineering departments to get productivity tools. They'll get editors, they get a bunch of Slack licenses so you can be more productive by chatting all day. And so examples of this are JetBrains, Cognitech producing Kotlin and Datomic. So editors and database tools are sort of a place where investment in languages actually can occur. And so here the question is value, right? Is it worth it? And for a business person, they think if I can pay 2% of my costs for a 10% gain in productivity, that's free money. This is just, I just get to have more money, more ability. And a second question they might ask is, am I externalizing parts of my business in a useful way? So maybe you could have really high quality database talent in-house, But alternatively, you could get a support contract where some other institution, some other organization is managing that talent and being able to attract and retain them and keeping them happy. And you just get the benefit of having their expertise for a cheaper price in a way that you wouldn't be able to. So the mind of the non-technical business person, I think, is even weirder. So I found a second book, the true way to solve a problem. Surely someone's run into how weird these people are before. So I found this book, The Confessions of a Pricing Man. So this one I think is actually an enjoyable read. He says some consumers use price as an indicator of the product's quality. For them, the simple equation of higher price equals higher quality becomes a handy rule of thumb. And it's sort of like, yeah, if something's like too cheap, maybe someone cut corners, and maybe if it's a little more expensive, maybe some extra care. But to me, it's like clearly at some point, maybe it's like a scam to me. But maybe it is a social status symbol, like a status symbol. But the idea that it's actually literally higher quality, it was somehow shocking to me. And so this book goes on. This also occurs in the business-to-business world. Cloud software firm offered their product for extremely low price. The competitive product was 5 times more expensive. Several months after launch, the CEO said, small businesses are really excited about our prices, but larger companies think our price point is so low that they have no faith in our product. And it's like, as a developer, it's like, no, we provided equivalent value for a fifth of the price because we're so much better. Like, it's incredible how much better we are. How can you not see that the lower price is an indicator that we're more efficient in doing this? And so I was like, that's weird. It's weird what they write in books. So sometime after this, I was in contact with someone from, let's say, a Swiss financial institution who had troubles they had things to do with their database. So they were curious about what I was up to with Acadia, and we were talking about it, and it sort of became clear like what they needed was not something that could be provided by Acadia. But the person I was talking to really liked the design and was really excited about it, so he was telling me like, if we were to pursue this, it can't even get on the desk of the person who will decide unless it costs 60,000 euros a year. Like, that's a baseline. And he's saying like, the way the hierarchy works is that decisions about these fundamental technologies happen at a certain level in the hierarchy, and at that level of the hierarchy, financial decisions operate at a certain size. And if the financial decision is smaller, that happens at a lower level in the organization. So you won't even be in the door, you won't be even considered. I've heard this from a couple people, some from consultants, some other consultants I know, that like one reason for this is like, it's like part of what the point of paying someone so much for this is that you can then serve their head on a platter if something goes wrong. It wasn't me, it was this person over here. And I think that's like a cynical view of it. If I try to like be understanding and kind to this non-technical business person in this hierarchy, it's like I have to assign risk and investment to each of these areas, to what's going on in the database and the client. And if I say, okay, for the database, I assess this as very important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Oracle, where it's used by the biggest companies in the world. I assess it important. I'm spending a lot of money on it, so they'll be able to provide something, higher price, higher quality. They'll be able to provide a higher quality support to us. And so when something goes wrong, that person says, look, I actually assessed the situation correctly. I assessed that this is a risky area for our business, and I invested in it heavily. And now we can go talk to whoever it is at Oracle who will, you can leave my office now. So I found these things, that in particular, I was just like, I don't know what's going on there. If you have experience with that, I'd be curious to talk to you about that. But Yeah, so a business person might be looking at this and being like, yeah, this is how efficiency works. This is how the world works. And a programmer is looking at this just feeling anti-corporate sentiment. Like, thinking about programming in this way is like sick and twisted. And the part about culture that I mentioned, that's what we're going to talk about. How do we sort of mediate this adoption challenge with being programmers who are like not into thinking of the world this way. So yeah, so with these sort of interests of the non-technical business person, I made an attempt at approaching that with this talk, A Decision Maker's Guide to Type Functional Programming, where I did case studies and went to talk to different companies where they had used Elm or Haskell or OCaml and tried to ask, like, I don't care technically what happened, but how did it work for hiring? What was retention like? What, as a business, went on? So I think we can speak to those things, but it's a little, yeah, it's something that will be hard to do with the kind of organization we have. So right now, yeah, the second area of challenge is organization. So there are a bunch of companies and institutions that are using functional languages, investing in functional languages, and maybe there's an organization, there's a company that supports my work on Elm, and another one that supports Elm Test or Elm UI, and a company that's supporting editor tooling for Elm, and another one that's supporting different editor tooling, and then a third one that's also supporting some kind of editor tooling that's separate from that. And what's nice about this, and I think how this usually works, is it's like often a perk for more senior developers who are kind of important to the business, but maybe not as interested as they used to be. And so it's a way to keep them interested, and then their expertise about the particulars of the code base can still be accessed by the other employees. So some of the issues with this in-house development is that it's usually only budget for a part-time effort, and the work can get lost easily, right? So if that person ends up quitting, or if the priorities of the business change and that perk goes away, that effort, the code is lost, but also like the investment in the person, what they know, what they've learned, sort of, there's nowhere that goes. It just goes with them, and maybe they do something else with it and maybe not. It also focuses on code. Like, these investments aren't going to be like a marketing effort or learning resources for something that's generally useful for the language and growing the ecosystem. So one could say that these organizations could cooperate more efficiently by saying, instead of running this in-house with these issues, we take that work and we sort of form some cooperative way of doing this work. So in this, if there was some kind of cooperative development, there'd be a mechanism for orderly talent management. So like a compiler developer, an editor developer could have a real career that has some kind of stability that's not dependent on, the CTO right now is very supportive, but is the next one going to be? After this funding round that's coming up, is someone going to come in on the books and cross something off? And you could potentially have sensible roles where it's like a compiler developer is separate from developer relations, is separate from legal. Whereas under the in-house role, it's like kind of the tasks fall to whoever's willing to do it. You'll have some continuity. So a big thing that I struggled with was like seeing people who are talented and there being a possibility of having a mentorship relationship with them, but their jobs may change, their interests may change, and if you spend 2 weeks or 4 weeks mentoring someone, and then they say, I'm not that interested anymore, it's like all that investment in the person just goes away. And similarly, when they go away, there's no mechanism for that knowledge to be passed on to someone else. So in this cooperative version, we could have more continuity with this. And finally, you can do more strategic planning. So like you could actually do marketing. you could direct efforts to strategic priorities in a way that, rather than having 3 people independently working on different editor projects, you can say, we want to focus on this particular area that's of interest in the broader community, like broader programming community, so we would get some attention from that, and then we can focus on these other goals. So again, the business person is saying, that's efficiency, that's the nature of the firm. Like, someone got a Nobel Prize for thinking about these things. And the developer, thinking about anti-corporate sentiment, this sure looks like hierarchy and structure that we don't like. So the last section is culture, and the question here is there a workable value system for a more efficient organization where we can sort of meet the adoption challenges that we face with the non-technical business person and with having an organized way to manage the careers of people working on these languages. So we'll look at 3 things: the Silicon Valley startups, Japanese family businesses, and Danish agricultural cooperatives. The Danish one is a little bit for fun. So in Silicon Valley startups, we all know the deal. There's venture capitalists. They want exponential growth. They want to have their liquidity event, their exit. They have their initial public offering. They pursue shareholder value. They care about quarterly results. And it's like, hey, should we produce like good quality code? That's not that important. Should we think about the social effects of what we're doing here? Definitely not. If the girls using Instagram are more likely to get anorexia, well, they should stop using it. It's like, and who's to say it's us, and I'm just the CEO, I'm beholden to the shareholders, they decide. And the shareholders say, well, I'm just a shareholder, well, look at all the other shareholders and the CEO. And it sort of reminds me, if anyone's read this book on killing, how like when you structure a firing squad, it's like someone gives the order to fire and 10 people fire and everyone is not responsible because the person giving the order, well, I didn't shoot the gun. The people shooting the gun, well, it was the next guy's gun who actually did it. So you have this structure that like predictably produces the result it was designed to produce. And so when I was writing this, I was reminded of this excerpt from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He did a Harvard commencement address in 1978. And he was like, I'm famous for criticizing the Soviet Union, and now that I'm in America, I'm going to criticize America. And so he's talking about sort of this legalistic culture, and he says, if one is right from a legal point of view, nothing more is required. Nobody may mention that one could still not be entirely right and urge self-restraint. This would simply sound absurd. Everybody strives towards further expansion to the extreme limit of the legal frames. A food product manufacturer is legally blameless when he poisons his produce to make it last longer. After all, people are free not to purchase it. And he says, whenever the tissue of life is woven of legalistic relationships, it creates an atmosphere of spiritual mediocrity. And that part stuck with me when I read it. So the point of talking about this is just to say that Silicon Valley values aren't inevitable. Like, this isn't something that has to occur anytime people try to organize and make something together. And second, the values embedded this, like this move fast and break things, aren't suitable for language design. It's like we can't just add a bunch of things we didn't think through to the language and then be like, oh, we'll just take it out if it doesn't work. And it's like, this is a more, like, you can't, if you're making the foundation of these technical, you can't just move fast and break things in the foundation of the building. So, yeah, second, I want to look to other types of organizational structure that have other values. So I've personally been interested in family businesses for a long time. Like some of you may know, Lego is a family business from 1931, and it's been the same family running it since then. But I found this Korean report from the Bank of Korea, and it's the factors and implications of the longevity of Japanese companies. And so it's focused on these like shinise, old companies, and there's like a list of companies that fit this description, companies that are older than 100 years. So Nintendo and Kikkoman, if you use soy sauce. But a lot of these companies are like hotels, tea shops. There's some metallurgy. Like it's an interesting list of companies. The part we're interested in is the reasons for longevity, and they have in their study of this, they identify 5 points. Focus on the core business, a foundation of trust, thorough craftsmanship, succession beyond blood ties, and conservative financial management. So I want to say a bit more about each of these. So in focusing on the core business, they say they respond to change in times, but they also maintain the unique technology and know-how since their founding. So an example of this is like Nintendo was founded in 1889 as a playing card company. And as the electronics boom started happening in the 1960s, they said, what if we could incorporate these into toys? And through the talent within the company, it became the Nintendo we know today. Second, we have the foundation of trust. And what I thought was, sort of intuitively, I was like, oh yeah, the customer should trust the thing. But they say long-lived companies value reputation and maintain long-term trust relationships with customers, business partners, employees, and society for 2 or 3 generations or more. And so they had 2 little stories, one about cooperation and talent in this section. So in cooperation, they said there are a total of 42 streets in Japan where 10 or more long-lived companies gather to form a shopping district, and these companies improve trust with business partners by realizing mutual prosperity through competition and cooperation. So by concentrating where they are, and they can then say, okay, technically we're competing against each other, but also we're on the street. Can we make improvements to the street? Can we think together how to make this little street more prosperous? And so the question I had reading this is like, would we as different language communities, different companies benefit from having stronger relationships where we can say, oh, we're actually facing a similar issue that I didn't realize, and that we could then figure out ways to cooperate more effectively. The second point was on talent. They say a human-centered management strategy that emphasizes technology and know-how embodied in employees rather than mechanical equipment. So they have this phrase from Toyota, which is another of these companies. Thing making is people making. This is a very literal translation, but it's sort of saying like to create high quality products, you have to first invest in your people. And I think like this really connected with me just because like in languages, it's like you have to make such an investment in all the different details of knowing how the different parts of the system work that yeah, I thought this was a really interesting thing, and like from my time in Silicon Valley, I didn't really get the sense that that was how they felt about talent. In craftsmanship, a craftsman's spirit that values precision, sincerity, and the basics, valuing the parts that cannot be manualized, and taking more care of the invisible parts than the visible parts. So the example there is like, so Kongo Gumi is like a shrine construction and maintenance company that's been in operation for 1,400 years. And the story is like the details and craftsmanship in the foundation will be extremely high quality even though no one's ever going to see those things. So yeah, they have a fun story here about size. They say craftsmen of long-lived companies also prefer to minimize their size, believing that being small not only increases their presence but also allows them to survive for a long time. And they use the insect strategy. So they set up this thing. It's like insect strategy versus elephant strategy. And I thought this was a very charming way of talking about it. They say elephants, which tried to survive by becoming larger, elephant strategy, ended up with only 2 species, the Indian elephant and the African elephant. While insects, which tried to survive by becoming smaller, insect strategy, account for 3/4 of all living things on Earth. And I think, like, to me, this connected back to what we started with the technical perspective of the author writes code, the programmers write code, the businesses, and you sort of try to expend your energy so quickly that one of those businesses will be the elephant and will sort of take you in, and it's all good. We don't need to think about things more deeply than that. And yeah, succession beyond blood ties. This isn't a perfect translation, but they had this phrase that they were like, it's better to adopt the 3rd generation. It's not about the direct lineage, and sort of my own interpretation of that is it's not about like a blood relationship to like your parents, but rather a blood relationship to the craftsmanship, the trust with the customers and partners and employees in society, and with the history of that business. And finally, with the conservative financial management, they said to pursue growth within the scope of internal funds and avoid excessive expansion. And the classic story here, yeah, they say specialize in businesses where they're strong through R&D investment. So places where this value of investing in your people will pay off because you have a longer time scale of how you think about things, how you think about employees than other types of companies. But avoid excessive facility investment and other business expansion. So the classic example is Kangogumi, which is still in operation, but in the 39th generation. So yeah, these are the kinds of shrines that they're maintaining. So yeah, in the 39th generation, they were trying to expand out of just maintaining and constructing shrines, but into more modern construction and trying to get bids for things in cities and things that don't look like this. And so it's a business where they're used to saying, hey, this project's going to take 15 years, and then the people at the shrine say, well, it's going to last 200 years, so that's no problem. But if you are trying to build an apartment building and you say, it's going to take me 15 years, it's not going to work. And so they ended up not being able to be profitable on those other types of contracts. They started taking on debt, and they ultimately were bought by a larger construction firm. So they're still in operation, but that 1,400-year continuous generations sort of, it's now under some other structure. So they say long-lived companies can expand their business by raising funds from outside sources, but they can go bankrupt if the market cools down. So they pursue growth within the scope of internal funds. And again, this is something that like, I think part of what we don't trust about Silicon Valley companies is like, there's this structure where someone comes in and they put in money and what they want back is more money. And it's like, what about doing a good job? What about the relationship with these people? It's like, they're not there for that. So yeah, and I don't want to say, I'm not an expert on this. This is just something I found interesting and inspiring for myself as another way to think about how you can organize things. And then, yeah, the fun one. So when I lived in Boston, my favorite bookstore was closing. And I went in for one last look, and I was like, oh, let's check the section on gardening. And there was this book, Cooperation in Danish Agriculture. And it was like the actual version from 1917, for some reason, was sitting there next to like books about honeybees, which I also bought. But essentially it traces the history of like how Danish farmers were successful in cooperating, whereas in the UK and in the Netherlands, there wasn't that same success, in the United States as well, with the Farmers Alliance. But in Denmark, they had success with this, both with their dairy and with their pig farming. And so this model, it seems to be good for well-defined capital investments. So the stories they talk about are, if you're a farmer who has 3 cows or 4 cows, you're not able to justify an investment in pasteurization facilities. But that means you're not able to pasteurize your milk. That means your butter's not as good quality. You're not able to sell it. But if you cooperate with a bunch of the farmers around you, you have enough of that. And so they developed like social structures and rules of how that would work. So like one person, one vote. When you put milk into to make butter, you would get back, when profits were returned to the dairy producers, it would be returned based on how much milk they were running through. Another thing they cooperated on was oversight for international labeling. So if they wanted to sell butter to England, instead of each having their own brand that some person in England would have to decide, do I trust this, is it good quality? They created this brand, the Lohrhorns, And you can, if you buy certain Danish butter, you'll still see this on the butter packs today. But just to be able to mark, hey, this is Danish butter, we checked it, it's safe, it's good quality. And then people in different countries would say, oh, if I want good butter, I know I can go buy the Danish stuff. And by producing this, the butter, the byproducts were actually helpful in raising pigs. They become pork exporters. So the reason I bring all this up is there's this quote that I really liked. And they say, the cooperative movement in Danish agriculture was not started by a circle of philanthropists or even by the landlords for the purpose of benefiting the practical farmers. It has grown up locally and gradually among the peasants in the villages, and it takes root in the feeling of solidarity and a sense of belief in the benefits of mutual help among the peasants, which can be traced back to remote centuries. So my point in all this is just that, like, we don't need to be locked into the mindset that if we try to organize together and cooperate, that it's necessarily going to take the form of how things go in Silicon Valley. Like, we don't have to behave in that way. We don't have to have that kind of relationship to each other. So to wrap up, we have the non-technical business person, the final boss of adoption. We have this concept of productivity languages that are distinct from platform languages and have their own challenges. And we can think about it in terms of having this cycle where we all can grow stronger together through cooperation, and that we can organize more efficiently to be able to show, hey, we're able to provide what businesses need, we're able to provide what programmers need to be productive, and we have alternative kinds of cultures that have a history of working that we can look to run this in a way that's such that the needs of programmers and the needs of the business people who are making decisions about this stuff can both be met. So what this means for Haskell or OCaml or other languages, I don't know. I hope that there's something in here that's interesting to think about. In the case of Elm in particular, so I've been working on Acadia, this database part, and I hope that it can form some way of bringing all this together. So I want to, in ending, I want to say thank you to people like Elm who've been very patient with me in trying to not just put together the programming language, but try to solve these other social and organizational challenges. And thank you to my wife, who's been very supportive for many years of these efforts. And finally, thanks for your attention, and I hope there's something interesting that you can take from this. Thank you. Yeah, you go.
Okay, thank you, Evan. That was very, very nice to hear. We have about 5 minutes for questions. There's a microphone up there and one down here. So if you have a question, make your way to the microphone. Yeah?
Yeah, and I should say, if you want to check out the database stuff, I've essentially in a phase where I've like shown it to friends, but I'm starting to open it up a little bit more. So if you're interested in it, you can, there's a little form there that we can get in contact. But.
Hello, my name is Pedro. Thank you for the talk, it was great. You mentioned at some point that maybe there could be some contributions we could do between programming languages communities.
Sure.
Do you have some thoughts on top of your head? What are those?
Yeah, so I think the story of JetBrains is interesting. So my understanding is that the first product they had was like jump to some place in the code, like a very minimal thing. But having some kind of shared editor project between languages where it's like if you're working with functional languages, like something that works in OCaml, something that works in Haskell, like there could be something interesting there. But yeah, I kind of want to leave it open-ended because, you know, these are the kinds of things you'll find through communicating, I think. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Evan. That was a very interesting talk. I'm really glad that there are people thinking about these organizational issues rather than the technical issues. I think that's really important. There's been a lot of talk about open source culture, and that, of course, has had a huge impact on businesses which then don't support it properly, right? So we depend on some open source products that aren't really well supported right now. I just wonder, have you thought about the overlap between the open source culture and what you're talking about, whether there's anything interesting there?
Yeah, so, I'll answer it how I understood it, but I think I might be misunderstanding. So, the way I kind of see it is that, like, when you go to the founding documents of open source, they talk about, like, essentially, they talk about open source as, like, a freemium model. And so, to me, I think having the model like Kotlin, where you have the language which is free and open source, but that you also separately have the editor that is paid and that businesses can understand on their balance sheet. And so when a business person, you know, something that I think happens is a funding round is coming, someone pours over all the lines, and if they see a line that says salary for open source engineer, they say, okay, I'm paying money to definitely never make money, and they say no. And they see another line that says, okay, I'm paying 2% to get this 10% gain. They say, well, that's free money. Obviously, that stays in. And from our perspective, it's like, well, those are paying for the same thing. It's like the foundation of the business that you're running. But they don't understand it that way. So I think having this like dual approach is a way to balance those. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
It's an open-ended question.
Yeah.
That's the most part of the answer.
There's maybe time for one more question. Do you have a platform for people to communicate on? Do you have an idea about how we're gonna? That's your form.
Yeah, that's
Amazing.
that's where I can get emails and stuff. But yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully, yeah, I'm very nervous talking about these things, so hopefully it went okay. But yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.